Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Dauntless LeadHERship, where I have the pleasure of welcoming a millennial woman leader, Louise Peterson. Louise is with us today to talk about her career journey, her views on leadership, and her current role. She is today Group Product Manager at Spotify. Before that, she was at Amazon, did a brief stint at PepsiCo, and I knew her when she was in school. And so I'll start by reminding everybody to please find us, of course, on Spotify or on the favorite platform of your choice to listen, follow, subscribe, and send me your comments. And with that, I welcome Louise.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
So, Louise, I always start my podcast by asking, what does dauntless mean to you?
It's a great question. I always think of dauntless courage, of course. I think that's the most common use of it. And I think to me, in addition to thinking about courage and determination, I think it's about the relentless pursuit of both of those of courage and determination. Just never stopping, not being afraid to give up. And I think about the inverse, which is daunting, right?
Mm.
If you are dauntless, then you aren't afraid to fail. And so yeah, that's how I think about dauntless.
I'm going to ask you to talk about your career journey, but you made me think to ask this question. Are you afraid to fail? Have you been afraid to fail? At Spotify, what happens when you screw up?
Yeah, a great question. So I would say that I've been afraid to fail in several points in my career, but I think I've, especially in product management, have grown used to failing, and have grown used to preparing for failure. So in product management, we never just launch something. We always test it first, which gives us the guardrails to test and fail in a safe manner. And I think Spotify does a really good job of providing those guardrails and that safe space to fail and to try things and go for innovative solutions, all with the guidelines in mind that we should test and make sure that we feel comfortable before releasing something to market. And so, yeah, I think I've adopted that mindset that, yeah, we should try something if we have conviction, but it's okay if we fail. That's why we test.
I think that's part of the DNA of Spotify. I remember meeting the founders right when Spotify was coming to the US. I was running a an online grocer, and we happened to be in similar circles, and they hadn't quite figured out what's going to monetize, what's going to generate revenue, but they knew they wanted kind of a legal, correct way to download music after the Napster fiascos of years before. And it seemed like they were very open to try, fail safe, fail fast, and move on. That seems
Exactly.
like it's still the case.
Yeah, definitely within my experience. And that is very cool that you met our leaders way
It
back
was a
then.
long time ago.
Very cool.
Um, in the early days of the internet, and I like to say on this podcast, today we call it digital transformation, but back then we weren't even sure what to call it. So it was called
Totally.
the internet or going online, and it was really fun early days of kind of the wild, wild west.
Exciting times in the industry for sure.
Yeah, and still is, by the way. And I'll ask you to talk about, you've had some really intriguing roles so far. Start maybe where you are today, what's your current role, and go backwards. You've been at some very revolutionary places and some very tried and true places. And what made you make the changes that you made?
Yeah. So my career journey has been less than linear for sure. I am very surprised to be where I am today, given where I started my career at PepsiCo. Quite a leap to make my way to Spotify, but I'll start where I am now. So yeah, I'm a group product manager at Spotify. My group sits within the advertising or arm of the business, and we work primarily on the free tier which is monetized by ads. And my team owns all of the end formats in the app. So I manage a team of 4 product managers who all own different aspects of the ad experience. So that includes in-stream audio and video placements. It includes in-feed display and muted video units. And our team is responsible for the management of all of those existing formats and then innovation around new formats and products that we want to bring online for advertisers. And as well as making sure that we are still providing a great experience for listeners on Spotify, which is a ever-present problem, just making sure that we can make sure that the advertising experience is not just beneficial for Spotify, but also benefiting our users in some way.
Well,
And
thank
so,
you. That's
yeah.
to me, as a user, a loyal user of Spotify, and also as a podcaster, something I struggle with too, the balance between the experience of listening and sponsorship and advertising. So I want to hear more about your career, but maybe we'll go back to that.
Yeah, sounds good. So I've been at Spotify for coming up on 4 years. I initially entered the company just focused on podcast monetization. And when I first entered the company as a senior product manager, I was working with a squad of engineers, designers, data scientists, um, as well as user researchers, and working primarily on a product called SAI or streaming audio insertion, which is a type of technology that we use on Spotify to dynamically insert ads into the stream of content. We also have a different type of advertising technology called DAI, dynamic ad insertion, which is typically done ahead of a podcast download. I didn't touch that much, but that's just another type of advertising technology for podcasts specifically that we use on the platform that also enables off-platform monetization as well. So that's how I started my journey here at Spotify. And I think got very lucky during my entry point for the company that the advertising organization was growing. And I landed a really awesome manager who knew that I had goals to move into management. And so as he made his way up through the company, he took me with him and promoted me to group product manager. And that's when my scope expanded and I took over the management of the entire formats group. And so now I don't just manage the podcast formats, I manage all of the formats within Spotify between music and podcasts.
So, want to talk a minute about sponsorship? We'd love to have you. Just send me a message at lisa-kent.com. And right here is where you could be reaching and talking to our many interested listeners, talented, inspired, committed professionals who are looking to up their leadership game. Just let me know.
Prior to that, I was at Amazon. And I'll just work backwards in my career journey. My last role at Amazon, I was a senior product manager working on a new physical store business within fashion. At the time, they hadn't even named it yet. I was only there for about 9 months, but they were spinning up a new concept for a physical store where they wanted to reinvent the way folks shopped for clothing and fashion items. And so instead of having a traditional showroom floor, they wanted only one item on the showroom floor, and you could browse the entire store using your smartphone and QR codes to see different colors and different
Hmm.
SKUs that were existing within the physical store. And then they incorporated a lot of the warehouse technology into the fitting room experience. So you didn't have to pick up clothes as you shopped through the store. All of the clothes would be brought to you from the back of the store using some of our warehouse technology and prompted using a fitting room screen. And so that's where my role came in. I was working on all of the monetization activities as part of this new physical store business. including things like advertising. So that my primary role was owning paid product placements on the showroom floor, as well as working on digital ads on the fitting room screen and within our app. And then also was touching some of our what we called flywheel experiences, where we were trying to drive additional revenue for Amazon outside of just selling clothing in and out of the front doors. So that included things like, driving Prime signups at checkout, or omni-channel, where you could buy something online and pick it up in store. That was all, I was touching all of those monetization work streams. And I think that's
What
what
happened? What happened to the store?
yeah, so it launched shortly after I left. It did not last long. I think Amazon now is rethinking its physical store strategy, as they're starting to spin down a lot of the physical stores that they launched in the last 10 years. And so I think it was successful. I think they opened up 2 or 3 different locations after that first launch in LA, but now is no longer. And that was kind of what prompted my reason to move. This was back in 2020, 2021. We were just coming out of COVID. I was starting to have doubts about the future of physical retail and wanted a different experience. And so that's what led me to my role at Spotify.
Excellent. And you came out of school and went to a traditional consumer packaged goods company.
I did. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about how I made my way there. So coming out of school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work for a major company, but I had no idea what industry. And my focus was just making sure that I was gathering skills in my first role that I knew would be useful long term. And so coming out of school, I had 2 job offers, one with the New York Times and working on digital advertising of all things, which is funny because that's where I landed now, or working in for PepsiCo as a customer success associate, was essentially a sales role for
Mhm.
undergraduate students coming out of university. And one was in New York, the other one was in Burlington, Vermont. And I saw all of my friends going to New York City and having a very similar experience that they did at university. But I really wanted a different experience. I really wanted to push myself and push myself out of my comfort zone. So I decided to take the sales job in Burlington, Vermont. And I was on a traditional sales route where I was given a portfolio of small businesses and restaurants in the Burlington, Vermont area. And every day I got in my car starting at 3:30, 4 in the morning, and would go to each business and stock shelves, take orders, try to upsell them on new innovation. And then I'd make my way back to the warehouse to make sure that all of my orders had gone in for the day and make sure that none of my customers needed extra product or anything like that. And so I was in that role for about a year before then getting promoted and moving down to the Washington, D.C. area, where I was focused on generating new business for PepsiCo. So similarly, I was given a territory, but instead of having a traditional sales route to follow, I was given just a blank slate of this is your territory, try to go win as much new business as possible and retain all of the existing business that we already have, specifically in food service. So this was more geared towards restaurants, small stadiums and concert venues, things like that. But similarly was working out of my car and trying to make the hardest sales case of all time, go from ordering Coca-Cola to Pepsi. And
Mhm.
that is a very hard sales case. I'm sure it's, talked about in a lot of different sales forums. But yeah, so I did that for about another year before then landing my first job at Amazon.
Do you think, and I definitely have an opinion on this, that going into sales as your first role benefited you and how?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I tell any student who reaches out to me for career advice that if you're struggling and finding your first role out of school, look at sales jobs. There are always sales jobs.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier maybe than some other disciplines for someone coming out of their undergrad to get that type of role. And I think it's probably some of the most useful experiences I've ever had in my career. It forced me to talk to people of all walks of life, relate to people of all walks of life, and speak in terms that they understand and value. Because I think at the core of everything we do in business is at the root of it sales, and being able to communicate to people in values and terms that they understand is really the key to success in everything in life, I think. And so, yeah, I value my sales experience tremendously.
I completely agree. When I talk to students or my own son who's just graduated, I say get into a company with a product or service that you believe in, but go in sales. First of
Absolutely.
all, you learn the persuasive skills that are important in business forever. But secondly, I think this comes up in every podcast, you learn how to really listen and understand what's going to motivate your consumer, your customer, your patient, and that makes you great as you grow as a leader. Um,
Definitely.
and as you said, if there are no jobs in other areas, there's always jobs in sales. Um,
Absolutely. And I
well,
think
that's
also it was healthy for me to work for a company right out of the gate that I wasn't necessarily a customer of myself. I'll be honest, growing up, I didn't drink soda. And so
mm,
for me, it was a real challenge. How do I sell a product that I'm not actually actively consuming myself? And figuring out how to speak about something and sell something that you don't necessarily use yourself is a real challenge and a real, I think, good exercise for people to go through, because I think you may be more convincing if you don't use it yourself initially, because it forces you to dig into all of the reasons why something is beneficial and could be beneficial for somebody versus just focusing on your own personal experience. So for me, it was a real interesting experience because I was forced to sell something that I didn't necessarily love myself.
speaking of putting yourself in that role, you mentioned one great leader that you've been kind of following his journey at Spotify. Did you have good managers and leaders at Amazon and PepsiCo and a couple of things that made them great?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have been very blessed throughout my whole career journey of having managers who have supported me, supported my goals, and seen success when I didn't always believe in my personal success. Derek Jones from PepsiCo, he was my first manager at a school. He interviewed me and hand selected me as part of the process, and then really coached me to be a strong salesperson, and then really supported my transition from that first role at PepsiCo to then the food service sales representative. Um, then another one that comes to mind is Jessica Cree. She was the first person who hired me to Amazon. And so at Amazon, I was first hired into a sales role. Got very lucky that I entered the sales role with a very small team at Amazon. We were selling package lockers
Hmm.
for multifamily home complexes, essentially replacing the concierge service with a smart package locker. Um, and so I think I was hired for this role because I knew how to install vending machines. And that
Ha.
logistics experience was transferable. Anyway, I totally credit Jessica for seeing my potential in that first round of interviews, recognizing that although I wasn't an expert in tech. I didn't even have any technical skills. I really just had these sales skills and the experience of working in logistics. She saw that and saw my potential and decided to take a chance on me and hiring me to Amazon. And then from there, she was really instrumental in helping me transition from sales into product management. She herself had rotated through a couple roles at Amazon and then encouraged me to come with her. And she was able to find roles for me that she knew would gather experiences that I needed to have in order to get to my eventual goal of product manager. And so I think between Derek and Jessica and my current manager now, Joe, I think all three of them first saw potential in me and took a risk and a chance on me, which is something that I'm ever grateful for. And then they also took the time to understand what my goals were and find either gaps or opportunity areas that they knew that I could improve, and helped me find the tools to actually fill those gaps and get to where I want to be. So I think the two important pieces there that ended up helping me were, yeah, finding my potential, seeing it, and believing me, and then putting the energy into helping me achieve my goals. So
So I want to just repeat those because I think those are great leadership qualities. Seeing the potential in your team and then understanding what that team member might want and helping them get there. Because
exactly.
when you help your team get there, you also help yourself, right? They
Definitely.
elevate their skills, you're able to elevate yours. And I think sometimes in the craziness of building our own careers, we forget about everybody around us. And
Absolutely.
for those who are listening, at every level, no matter what, even entry level, there are people you can impact by instilling confidence and by maybe helping them get exposure to something they need to get
Completely agree.
exposure to. So great leadership qualities. So much more I want to ask you. Um, would you take a risk on somebody today if you were hiring and they didn't have maybe the tech background, but they had the sales background or vice versa?
Yes, I think I would, and I have. Yeah, so and this is one thing that I've observed as I've made my transition between Amazon and Spotify. Um, I think there's two different hiring cultures that I've been exposed to, and this is where I think I really value Amazon's historical hiring approach, which is where they always led their hiring managers to value well-rounded candidates, general athlete candidates. So not necessarily somebody who has the explicit experience that you may be hiring for and looking for, doesn't necessarily need to be an expert, but has applicable experiences and has applicable skills that would be transferable for the role that you're hiring for. Um, and of course, this doesn't always apply to every single role. In some roles, of course, you need to really hire an expert
Yeah.
in order to be successful. But I think in my journey, I've really found success with hiring folks who bring a different set of experiences to a role because they're able to think about problems differently because they've been in different industries, because they've attacked different sets of problems. But at the end of the day, the core skill sets are the same. And so they've been able to transfer those. And so when I'm hiring folks, I definitely look for a well-rounded skill set, a series of subsequent experiences that have built on one another, but not necessarily within the same industry or role. I think the ability to pivot and learn on the job is just as important as hyper focus on one specific area.
Hmm.
And so would I hire somebody today? It's an interesting question. It depends on the role I'd be hiring for. Because in my current role, having an ad tech background and having really strong advertising experience is really important and something that my team needs a little bit more of. Excuse me. Um, and so, but in different circumstances, I would totally go for the general athlete as well. So I think it really depends on the role that you're hiring for, what the circumstances of your general team are. So that way you're making sure you're bringing in a voice who adds value in a way that's different from the rest of your team. So I've got a bunch of really strong I would call them general athlete product managers on my team right now. And so I would be looking for maybe a different voice if I were going to hire another person today.
Interesting. Well, and good to hear, given the craziness of the job market, that moving around is not necessarily a detriment, might even be an asset when you're considering talent.
Definitely.
And I believe that's true at all levels, but particularly true as you hit middle management, that you have to have at least tried one or two other things because you have that perspective. You saw how Amazon thought about hiring. You might not have seen that if you spent your whole career at Spotify.
Definitely.
Want to talk a little bit about Spotify and selfishly about podcasting.
Sure.
Um, why do you think podcasts have taken off the way that they have when we're such a video culture?
It's a great question. I think podcasts have replaced the need that radio used to provide during the day. I think as humans, we're naturally interested in what other people have to say, and so I think radio used to have talk shows and podcast-like shows that folks would listen to, during the workday or on their way to work. And I think as radio has shifted and we've moved more to a streaming culture, I think podcasts have been able to kind of fill that gap and that need to listen to other people talk and hear stories. And so I think that's how podcasting came to be. I am by no means a podcasting expert. I work with a lot of folks here at Spotify who are, but that would be just my observations, that I think it's really filled the gap that radio used to.
I think that might even be true of music too. So we used to discover because somebody was feeding it to us. Now we're able to kind of let our devices know our preferences. And so we have our playlists, and it's nice to be able to hear a story from outside, whether that's a music story, whether that's a verbal podcast story. Um, and we talked about the advertising, and I'd love to hear a little about the challenges of ad tech because right now I don't have a sponsor. And sometimes some of my favorite podcasts, I'm overwhelmed by how much advertising is fed to me. And I'm torn. I think I could use a sponsor, I could do more. But on the other hand, I don't want people to say, I don't want to listen to Dauntless Leadership because they're interrupted every 90 seconds by an ad. So how do you find your advertising clients? How about your podcasters? What's an ideal podcast for you to be a part of?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't control this area of Spotify much, but I can talk a little bit about the parameters that we will typically help with monetizing. So there's a couple of different ways that podcasters monetize today. I think there are direct relationships with advertisers that a lot of creators have, and will use different uh, uh, modes to insert those ads into their podcast. Sometimes that's just, taking a minute to read something or say something, shouting out your sponsor, and you don't necessarily have to have like a automated solution for that. Um, Other podcasters will go after, or not go after, but will be more open to dynamic ad insertion. And typically at Spotify, you have to hit a threshold of audience to be able to have the certain number of impressions that an advertiser would be looking for.
And who are your most interesting clients in the ad tech space, and why do you think you're successful with them?
Yeah, so Spotify to date has had, we have a couple of different channels. Our primary channel, though, has been what we call our direct guaranteed channel, which is where we're working with some of the largest advertisers to insert streaming ads into music and podcasts, but also purchase things like display ads and muted video as well. And those are your typical McDonald's, Athletic Greens is a popular one on podcasts. And those are larger companies usually who have big budgets. And so oftentimes you'll hear them a lot within our streaming ads business. We also have what we call our Spotify Ads Manager, which is a self-service platform for advertisers. And so this can include any type of advertiser who wants to go through the process of uploading their advertisements straight to Spotify, and they can do this themselves without a salesperson. And this can include podcasters like yourself who want to advertise their podcast on Spotify, or it can include, larger businesses that just, don't necessarily need a salesperson to upload their advertisements for them.
So, we're talking about the future direction of podcasts and Spotify. And one of the things that I asked you about initially is video. I have video and audio. What do you think does the future look like?
Yeah, I think the trend is definitely skewing towards video podcasts. I think Spotify as a company is definitely investing in video first for podcasts. And that's something that we encourage on the platforms. I think you're also seeing this across our competitive platforms. Platforms like YouTube are being very successful with video podcasts. And I think that video is also um, uh, typically a more sought after piece of content for monetization
Mm.
because you can ensure that a viewer is actually seeing the ad or getting that impression in a viewable way.
Yeah.
If you don't have good creative, we have recently launched some generative AI tools for you to create your own audio creative on the platform itself. So you don't necessarily have to record your own audio creative, although you're a podcaster, so you'd be able to do that. But you can use our tools now to generate audio companions with Spotify.
I would love to try it. I'd love to try that up against me speaking and see which gets better results. And I
Yeah,
did see from the platform that I can also see what's working.
yeah, the industry is changing so quickly. I think because of the introduction of these Gen AI models
Yeah.
and machine learning, I think is key for how the business is changing. I think policy is another reason the business is changing a lot. We've had a lot of policy changes in the industry in the last few years from a privacy standpoint,
Mhm.
and so that's really changed the landscape of the business. And so Spotify, just like all the other platforms, is still figuring it out. And yeah, it's an exciting place to be right now.
I'm not sure where to go next because I want to ask you one question about Spotify, and then we're going to move on to some other topics. And
Okay.
that is that I saw a sign in Times Square where Spotify was standing behind their work from home policy, where many other companies, for lots of reasons, have called their folks back to work. And curious, how did that play within Spotify? What do you think about it? I know you work remotely. Um, how does that affect your culture, pro or con?
Yeah, it's a great question. And probably one of the reasons that I've stayed at Spotify, if I'm being honest. So when I was hired back in 2021, I was hired under the precedent that I would always be able to work remotely. And so Spotify rolled out this policy um, prior to my starting in 2021. I'm not totally sure when they started, um,
So
but their
before COVID,
I'd
before
have to
or
look into
during?
that. I'm not
Yeah,
totally sure.
yeah,
It could have been a result of
yeah.
COVID, but they have stood by it ever since. There hasn't been any wavering. And the way it works is they leave it up to their employees to choose how they want to work, but they consider themselves to be a remote first culture to give folks that flexibility. And so now we do have major offices all over the world. The primary US office is based in New York. We've got one in LA, got one in Miami. We've got a couple of different locations, but they support all of their employees to work remotely or come into an office if they choose or located near one and want to come in every once in a while. And so this definitely permeates through the culture. I think it forces us to be very active in our offline communication. So we use tools like Slack. We use lots of documents we use the Google Suite. So using Google Docs and Sheets to make everything that we work on shareable across the company, as well as just being very vigilant about making sure that information is readily available for folks. And so, yeah, I was very proud to see that placement on the billboard in Times Square because I think Spotify really does place importance on employees having that freedom and flexibility to do their work, as well as the trust in their employees to do their work. They're not uh, telling folks when and how they have to work, as long as the work gets done, and gets done in a healthy and appropriate way. They don't really care where you work. And I really value that. It's given me the freedom to travel, the freedom to prioritize my family when I need to, while also still being able to get my work done, just in a way that works best for my life. And I know a lot of my coworkers have benefited from the same.
I mean, I just love the philosophy. You know that the company I started 20 years ago was about remote work and flexibility, primarily for women and new moms. And, seeing some companies still stand for that is great. I worry that younger people may not get the training and development they need, but it sounds like you have, and it sounds like you've found allies that have helped you in your career. So, what would you tell people who have hybrid or remote roles in terms of how to develop and foster those important relationships?
Yeah, it's a great question and something I'm always looking to do better at. I think the first and foremost thing to recognize is it just takes more effort when you're working in a remote culture. Because when you're working in an office, there's lots of natural interactions that happen on a regular basis just because of the nature of bumping into one another and working in the same space and environment. When you're remote, you don't have any of that. And so you really have to be intentional about reaching out to folks and having interactions in an intentional way because you don't have them naturally in the environment that you're working in. And so I tell folks to prioritize one-on-ones with people, have virtual coffee, have one-on-ones, have informal conversations. Slack has tons of features that make remote collaboration really easy. So things like huddles, allowing folks to collaborate, albeit virtually, but still in a live environment. And so at Spotify, we really try to prioritize meetings, but making sure that we have good structure and intent behind meetings with folks. So that way we can get the value that we otherwise would have if we were in person. We just have to be a little bit more structured and intentional when we make time for that.
So be intentional about relationship building and relationship nurturing, which is important within your organization. And I would say also externally in your industry without your organization, because you
Absolutely.
never know what's going to happen next. And although this podcast is for all genders, I often say women tend to have so much on their shoulders. They don't always prioritize the networking and the relationships that might help them grow in their business or their professional life. And you got to do it. And you definitely have to do it if you're working
Yes,
remotely.
I completely agree.
Okay. Just personally, what podcasts do you listen to? Any business books you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yes. Let's see. So, business books. I have one book that I recommend on a regular basis. It's called Inspire. And it is a book that I have recommended, I'd tell you probably 50 times at this point. But it's one of the books that really led me into product management. It does a great job of giving the overview of the product development life cycle in a technical organization, gives great examples from major tech companies. And it also, I think, taught me to understand how to speak about technology and how to use the language to talk about experiences that weren't necessarily technical in a way that could be understood by folks who are technical. And so that's a book that I recommend all the time to people who are interested in tech and product development, but especially to folks who want to make the transition into product management.
Do you know,
Um,
is it the Inspire the Universal Path? Is that it? I want to,
it is Inspire How to Create Tech Products Customers Love by Marty
okay.
Kagan.
And I will super that on the
Yes.
video
Cool.
version of this. And I want to make sure that people hear that. So inspire how to create tech products
That customers love.
that customers love. And by the way, I think that's relevant even if you're not creating tech products because tech products tend to be more complex. And if you can simplify the technology for the consumer, that's what you do, even if you're selling Pepsi or Sour Patch Kids or whatever.
Exactly.
Um,
Working
Excellent.
backwards from a customer need is really the core all commercial business, I think.
Excellent. So I know you have a little one at home, but what do you do if you have time? What do you do for fun?
What do we do for fun? We definitely have time for fun, if not more time for fun with the little one. We love to spend time outside. I have been a big runner for most of my life. Started running half marathons and marathons in college and have continued that. And that's actually what led me to meet my husband. So we
Hmm.
do a lot of that together. And nowadays it's not by ourselves and not necessarily on trails, but it's with a stroller. So
Mhm.
that's something we do a lot of after the work days. And then on the weekends, we love to go camping and enjoying the mountains that are outside Seattle. We have a camper van that we take out with a little rooftop tent on top. Baby loves it. Sleeps better probably out there than she does at home.
Oh.
And so, yeah, that's typically where you can find us on weekends is out in the mountains, hiking on trails, skiing if it's winter time, and then trying to sleep outside if we can because we love that. I've really appreciated you bringing me on to the podcast to talk a little bit about my career journey. I'm typically the one reaching out to others for advice, and so it's been an interesting experience today being on the other side of the table. So I appreciate you seeing value in our conversation today.
Absolutely. And I mean it. I will have you back. And in the meantime, I will close the podcast by saying thank you so, so much for being with us. And in the immortal words of Arlene Barnett, my mom, you don't have to know what you're going to be when you grow up, just what you want to do next. So thank you for joining us at Dauntless Leadership, and we'll see you next time.